I survived 72 hours of medical hell, but a human survived it without even breaking a sweat. I need you to understand something right from the start. Krell of the Vaxorian Medical Collective was not just good at medicine. No. I was exceptional, top of my cohort 3 years running. My thesis on cellular regeneration had been published in 7 different star systems. When I walked through the halls of Meridian Crossing Medical Institute, other students stepped aside. Not out of fear, mind you, but out of respect. The kind of respect you give to someone who is simply undeniably better than you. And I was not alone in my excellence. The Institute only accepted the best, Vaxorians like myself, obviously. Thelen students with their 4-chambered brains and perfect memory recall, a handful of Karathi, who were decent enough with surgery, I suppose. We were the elite, the top 0.01% of medical students in the known galaxy. Our instructors were legends. Our facilities were unmatched. Our future was guaranteed. So you can understand my confusion, my absolute bafflement, when I walked into advanced emergency medicine on that fateful morning and saw a human sitting in the 3rd row. A human, at Meridian Crossing. I actually stopped walking. My colleague Thessa, a Thelm with silver neural crests, nearly crashed into my back. "Krell, what are you doing?" she hissed, her translator clicking with annoyance. I pointed. Just pointed. Because words seemed insufficient for the absurdity before us. The human was youngish, I think. It is hard to tell with their species. They all look somewhat the same to me, with their flat faces and bizarre hair that grows only on top of their heads. This one was male, wearing the standard institute uniform that looked somehow cheaper on his frame. He had brown hair, cropped short, and was reviewing a data pad with the kind of intense focus that suggested he was trying very, very hard to belong. "Is that?" Thessa started. "A human," I finished. "Yes." Word spread through the classroom like a virus. Within moments, all 37 students were staring at the creature. Whispers filled the air, translators working overtime. Did admissions make an error? I heard they have a diversity initiative now. Diversity? From Earth? That death world barely has functional hospitals. I took my seat in the front row, where I always sat, and tried to ignore the situation. Surely the instructors would resolve this. Surely someone would politely escort the human to a more appropriate class, perhaps introduction to basic wound care, or identifying common pathogens, or something else more suited to his primitive medical understanding. Instructor Vone entered precisely on time. Vone was a Crotherian, which meant he had 6 eyes and approximately 0 tolerance for nonsense. He was also the head of emergency medicine, a veteran of 4 war zones, and someone whose approval I desperately wanted. "Settle down," Vone said, his voice cutting through the chatter like a surgical laser. "I see you have all noticed our newest student." Every eye in the room swiveled to the human. The poor creature seemed to shrink slightly in his seat. "His name is Tom Blake," Vone continued, pulling up a holographic display. "He comes to us from Earth Medical Academy, Boston campus. He has completed his basic medical training and qualifies for this advanced certification course." My hand shot up. "Instructor Vone, with respect, Earth Medical Academy is not exactly known for its rigorous standards." Several students laughed. Thessa tried to hide a smile. Vone's 6 eyes all focused on me, and I felt my confidence waver. Just slightly. "Krell, your opinion is noted and discarded. Tom Blake is here because he earned his place here, just as you all did. Or do you doubt my judgment?" "No, instructor," I said quickly, lowering my hand. "Good." Vone tapped the display, and a schedule appeared. A very, very long schedule. "Now, let us discuss your final rotation for this term. You will be participating in a 72-hour emergency medicine simulation. It will begin tomorrow at dawn and conclude 3 days later. You will receive no breaks longer than 10 minutes. You will handle mass casualties, infectious outbreaks, trauma cases, and surgical emergencies. Your performance will determine whether you receive your advanced certification or whether you repeat this entire year." Silence. Dead, heavy silence. 72 hours, someone squeaked from the back row. 72 hours, Vone confirmed. This is based on real conditions found in conflict zones and disaster areas throughout the galaxy. If you cannot handle 3 days, you cannot handle the career you have chosen. Question? I had about 1,000 questions, but my mouth had gone dry. 72 hours. No sleep. Constant pressure. I had trained for this, certainly, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it physically were two very different things. My gaze drifted, against my will, to the human in the third row. Tom Blake was still reviewing his datapad. He looked calm, too calm, almost bored. I felt a spike of irritation. Did he not understand what was being asked of us? Did his primitive brain not grasp the magnitude of this challenge? Tessa leaned over, whispering, "The human will break first, probably within 12 hours. Their species is not known for endurance." I nodded, feeling my confidence return. Agreed. This will be embarrassing for him. Perhaps they will create a separate, easier track after this disaster. We both chuckled, quietly, secure in our superiority. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and tomorrow the human would learn exactly why Meridian Crossing Medical Institute was not for everyone. Tomorrow, Tom Blake would understand his place. Or so I thought. Dawn broke over Meridian Crossing with all the gentle warmth of a cargo airlock opening into space. Which is to say, none at all. I arrived at the simulation center with my head held high, my medical kit perfectly organized, and my confidence absolutely bulletproof. Around me, my fellow students looked similarly prepared. Tessa had brought extra stimulant patches. Voren, a Korathi with excellent surgical skills, was doing breathing exercises. We were ready. The human showed up 2 minutes before start time, carrying a battered travel mug that smelled like burnt vegetation. Coffee. I think they call it. His eyes were clear, his uniform crisp, and he looked like someone about to take a pleasant stroll rather than endure 3 days of medical hell. "Good morning," Tom said to no one in particular. No one responded. We were professionals, after all, not social coordinators. Instructor Vaughan appeared on the observation deck above us, his 6 eyes scanning our group with what I can only describe as predatory amusement. "Your simulation begins now. Trauma Bay 3 has just received 47 casualties from a transport collision. Treat and treat, move." The doors exploded open, and chaos poured in like a flood. Alarms shrieked. Patients on gurneys, some screaming, some silent, some leaking fluids I did not want to identify, flooded into the bay. Holographic vital signs blinked in crimson urgency above each bed. The smell hit me next, a mixture of synthetic blood, burn gel, and something that my translator unhelpfully identified as terror. "Krell, take stations 1 through 5. Tessa shouted, already moving toward a patient with a collapsed lung. I ran, my training kicked in, my hands moved with practiced precision. Patient 1, a Thalan with crush injuries to the thorax. I grabbed a scanner, assessed the damage, marked him as urgent. Patient 2, a Vaxorian, my own species, with a compound fracture and arterial bleeding. I applied a tourniquet, my fingers slipping slightly on the blood-slick limb. Patient 3, Patient 4, Patient 5, the cases blurred together into a stream of suffering that demanded speed, accuracy, and perfection. Except I was not moving fast enough. "Krell, Patient 2 is declining." A medical drone beeped at me. I spun back, recalibrating the tourniquet, injecting coagulants, my mind racing through protocols. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Seconds felt like hours, and hours felt like seconds. My second heart, the smaller one we Vaxorians use for stress responses, started hammering against my ribs. Across the bay I saw other students struggling just as badly. Voren was sweating through his uniform. A student I did not know well was frozen beside a patient. Clearly overwhelmed, Tessa was managing, but barely, her usually precise movements now frantic and sharp. And then I saw Tom Blake. He was at Station 12, surrounded by 4 patients in various states of crisis. His hands moved like water, smooth and continuous. While I was still fumbling with my second patient, he had already triaged all 4 of his, started treatments, and was calmly giving orders to medical drones in that flat, emotionless tone humans use when they are concentrating. "Drone 4, start a fluid line. Wide bore, left antecubital. Drone 7, I need a chest seal and pressure bandages. Drone 2, prep the surgical suite, possible internal bleeding." He did not hesitate. He did not second guess. He just moved. I forced my attention back to my own patients. irritation burning in my chest alongside the exhaustion. This was hour one. Hour one. I was already tired, and we had 71 more hours to go. The simulation did not stop. It did not slow. It did not care about my feelings or my fatigue, or my growing sense that perhaps I had overestimated my own abilities. By hour 6, I had consumed 2 stimulant patches and 3 electrolyte supplements. My hands were shaking. Not much, just a slight tremor, but enough that I noticed, enough that I had to concentrate harder on every single task. By hour 8, Voreen excused himself to vomit in a corner. He returned 4 minutes later, pale and unsteady, but returned nonetheless. I gave him credit for that. By hour 10, Tessa made her first major mistake. She missed an internal bleed on a Karathi patient, and the simulation flagged it with a horrible blaring alarm and a holographic display that read "patient deceased" in 15 languages. She stood there staring at the words, her silver neural crests drooping in shame. By hour 12, I genuinely considered the possibility that I might die. Not literally, of course, but my body seemed convinced otherwise. My primary heart was racing. My secondary heart felt like it was trying to escape through my rib cage. My legs ached. My back ached. My eyes ached. Things I did not even know could ache were aching. I grabbed my 4th stimulant patch and slapped it on my neck, welcoming the sharp chemical burn that came with artificial alertness. And then I made the mistake of looking at Tom Blake again. He was still working, still moving with that same fluid efficiency. His uniform was barely wrinkled. His face showed concentration, certainly, but not strain, not exhaustion, not the desperate clawing fatigue that was eating me alive from the inside out. He took a sip from his burnt vegetation drink, set it down, and returned to suturing a laceration on a Theln patient with hands that did not shake even slightly. "How?" I muttered to myself, my translator barely catching the word. Tessa appeared beside me, looking like death warmed over and then frozen again. "The human. Have you seen the human?" "Yes," I said. "He has not stopped, not once. No stimulants, no supplements. He just keeps going." "Maybe humans metabolize differently," I suggested, though my voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Tessa said, though she did not sound convinced either. A new wave of patients arrived. More trauma, more chaos, more impossible decisions and insufficient time. I dove back into the work, because what else could I do? Quit? Admit defeat? Admit that perhaps, just perhaps, I was not as exceptional as I had believed? No, absolutely not. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, traitorous voice whispered a thought I did not want to acknowledge. The human was not struggling. The human was thriving. And we still had 60 more hours to go. Hour 36 arrived with all the mercy of a meteor strike. Which is to say, absolutely none whatsoever. I was not sleeping. Let me be clear about that. I was simply resting my eyes while standing upright, leaning against a supply cabinet, with my hands still technically holding a suture kit. That is not sleeping. That is strategic energy conservation. My body disagreed, screaming at me in every language my biology understood, but my pride refused to let me collapse. Around me, the simulation bay looked like a war zone, and not the clean, organized kind you see in training hollows, the actual messy, horrible kind. Voreen had given up entirely around hour 32. He was sitting in a corner staring at nothing, occasionally mumbling numbers that made no sense. 2 other students had already been removed by medical staff for their own safety. Tessa was still functioning, barely moving like someone walking through deep water, her neural crests hanging limp and colorless against her skull. The simulation had not gotten easier. If anything, Instructor Vaughn had increased the difficulty. We had dealt with a radiation exposure scenario, a biological animation, 3 separate surgical emergencies, and something involving a species I had never even heard of whose blood turned acidic when exposed to oxygen. That last one had been particularly educational, by which I mean nightmarish. My stimulant patches were no longer working. I had used 7. My body had built up tolerance, and now I was running on something that I can only describe as spite and denial. And then there was Tom Blake. The human was currently helping a Karathi student named Prel, who had frozen up during a complicated cardiovascular repair. Tom was not doing the work for him. No, that would have been against protocol. Instead, he was calmly talking Prel through each step, his voice steady and completely devoid of the exhaustion that should have been crushing him by now. Okay, Prel. You are doing great. Now, clamp the superior vena cava, gentle pressure. That is it. Good. Now we can visualize the tear. Prell's hands were shaking so badly I thought he might stab himself. Tom simply adjusted his own position to provide better light and continued his calm instruction. I hated him. I genuinely, deeply hated him in that moment. Not because he was human, but because he was making this look easy. Because he was helping others when I could barely help myself. Because every assumption I had made about his species, about his training, about his limitations, was crumbling like a sand sculpture in a hurricane. Krell. Incoming patient. Station 7. A medical drone chirped at me. I pushed off from the supply cabinet, stumbled slightly, caught myself and made my way to Station 7. The holographic display showed standard parameters. Moderate trauma, nothing I had not handled a dozen times in the past day and a half. I could do this. I was a Vaxorian. I was elite. The alarms changed. Not the simulation alarms, different alarms, real alarms. The overhead lighting shifted from simulation amber to emergency blue, and Instructor Vaughn's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. All students halt current activities. We have a genuine medical emergency incoming. This is not a drill. Prepare for critical trauma. ETA 90 seconds. The simulation patients vanished, holographic projections winking out of existence. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. We all stood there, swaying, exhausted, confused. A real emergency? Thessa whispered, beside me. Now, during the simulation? Apparently the universe does not care about our training schedule, I muttered, trying to pull my scattered thoughts into something resembling focus. The bay doors exploded open, and the emergency response team rushed in with a gurney. On it was a Critharian engineer, Vaughn's own species, and the damage was catastrophic. Chest trauma, massive hemorrhaging, partial crushed skull, and vital signs that were dropping faster than my confidence. The response team leader, a grizzled felon medic, shouted the report. Docking accident, explosive decompression. He was outside the safety zone when a coupling failed. We have maybe 5 minutes before total system failure. Instructor Vaughn was suddenly on the floor with us, not in the observation deck, and I saw something on his face I had never seen before. Fear. I need my best team on this. Now. Who is still functional? Silence. We all looked at each other. Looked at our shaking hands, our exhausted faces, our completely depleted reserves. I wanted to step forward. I desperately wanted to be the student who rose to this moment, who proved their worth when it actually mattered. But my body would not obey. My mind was screaming protocols at me, but they were jumbled, confused, mixing together into useless noise. Thessa took a half-step forward, then stopped, her confidence evaporating. Vorin was still sitting in his corner, useless. We were the elite students of the galaxy's best medical institute, and we were frozen like first-year novices.
I can help.
The voice was quiet, calm, steady. Tom Blake stepped forward, his burnt vegetation drink forgotten on a counter. His eyes were clear, his hands were steady. He looked at the dying Critharian on the gurney, with the expression of someone who had seen this exact situation 1,000 times before. I can help, he repeated, louder this time. Instructor Vaughn stared at him for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, I saw a dozen calculations run through his 6 eyes. Then he nodded, sharp and decisive. Blake, you have point. Tell me what you need. Tom moved to the gurney, his hands already assessing the damage. I need a thoracic kit, 4 units of Critharian universal blood substitute, and someone who can hold a retractor without passing out. The chest cavity is compromised. There is active bleeding from what looks like the primary cardiac vessel, and we have maybe 3 minutes before brain damage becomes irreversible. He was not asking. He was not suggesting. He was stating facts and giving orders, and his voice carried absolute certainty. Drone team, prep for emergency thoracotomy. Instructor Vaughn, I need you on the head. Monitor neural activity and manage the airway. Someone get me light. I cannot see properly in this bay. I watched, unable to move, as the human took control. As he cut open the chest cavity with precise, confident movements, as he reached into the wound without hesitation and began manually compressing the damaged vessel, while simultaneously directing drones to suction blood and expose the injury. There. I see it. Muscular clamp now. A drone handed him the instrument. He placed it with a single smooth motion, and the catastrophic bleeding slowed to a manageable trickle. The vital signs stabilized, just barely, hovering in the critical but survivable range. Tom did not celebrate. Did not pause. He simply continued working, repairing tissue, sealing vessels, fixing damage with the kind of calm efficiency that spoke of someone who had done this under far worse conditions than a clean, well-lit medical bay. 20 minutes later, the Cretharian engineer was stable, sedated, and being transferred to intensive care. He would live. He would fully recover, because a human student, running on 36 hours without sleep, had saved his life while the rest of us stood there like decorative plants. Tom stepped back from the gurney, finally, and I saw him take a long, slow breath. The first sign of strain I had witnessed from him. He picked up his burnt vegetation drink, took a sip, and grimaced. Cold, he muttered. Instructor Vaughn placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. All 6 eyes were focused on him with something that looked uncomfortably like respect. Well done, Blake. Exceptionally well done. Tom just nodded. Thank you, instructor. Should we resume the simulation? Should we resume the simulation? As if he had not just performed a miracle, as if he was not running on fumes, as if the rest of us were not on the verge of complete collapse. I looked at Thessa, she looked back at me, and in that shared glance, we both acknowledged the same terrible truth. We were not the elite. We had never been the elite. We had just never been tested against someone from a death world before. Hour 52 found me sitting on the floor. Not leaning, not resting strategically. Actually sitting, with my back against the wall and my legs stretched out in front of me like a broken medical drone awaiting repair. My pride had finally, mercifully died somewhere around hour 47, and its absence was almost a relief. The simulation had continued, because of course it had. The universe, I was learning, had a terrible sense of humor. I had made it through by sheer stubbornness and the fact that Tom Blake kept quietly correcting my mistakes before they became fatal. He would pass by my station, glance at my work, and casually mention things like, "You might want to check that dosage again," or, "That suture line looks a bit tense, maybe ease up," and every single time he was right. Every single time. Thessa had collapsed at hour 49. Just stopped moving mid-procedure and crumpled like her bones had turned to liquid. Medical staff had carried her out. She was the 17th student to be removed. Out of 37 original participants, we were down to 12 still functional, and I use the term functional extremely loosely. Tom Blake walked past me, noticed me sitting there, and stopped. He looked down at me with an expression that might have been concern or might have been pity. With humans, it was hard to tell. Their faces were distressingly similar in structure. "You okay, Krell?" he asked. "Define. Okay," I croaked. My voice sounded like grinding metal. "If you mean am I still breathing? Then yes. If you mean anything beyond that, then absolutely not." He sat down next to me. Actually sat down, right there on the floor, and pulled out another one of those burnt vegetation drinks from somewhere. He took a sip and offered it to me.
"Coffee?"
he said. I stared at the container like it might explode. "What is in that?" "Caffeine. Mostly. It helps. I have used 7 stimulant patches. Nothing helps anymore." "Yeah, stim stopped working after a while," Tom said, nodding like this was common knowledge. "Your body builds tolerance. Coffee is weaker but more sustainable for long shifts." Long shifts. He called this a long shift. Like it was routine. Like 72 hours of continuous medical emergencies was just another day at the office. "How are you still functioning?" I asked, too tired to hide the desperation in my voice. "Please, I need to understand. Is it genetic? Do humans have extra organs we don't know about? Secret stamina glands? What is your trick?" Tom laughed. Actually laughed. A short, tired sound that made him seem more alien than ever. "No trick, Krell. This is just normal for us." "Normal," I repeated, the word tasting like a lie in my mouth. "Yeah, normal." He took another sip of his coffee. "My residency back on Earth, I worked 80, sometimes 100 hours a week. 30-hour shifts were standard. You would show up Monday morning and not leave until Tuesday afternoon, handle whatever came through the door, sleep for 4 hours if you were lucky, then do it again. I stared at him. My translator must have malfunctioned. 30-hour shifts? That is illegal. That violates every medical labor law in the Galactic Health Accord. Earth is not part of the Galactic Health Accord, Tom said simply. And yeah, it probably should be illegal. We lose doctors to burnout, mental health crises, sometimes worse. But it is how we train. You learn to function when you are exhausted, when you are scared, when everything is falling apart and you are the only thing standing between a patient and death. You learn because you have no choice. That is barbaric, I whispered. That is Earth. He looked at me, his eyes tired but steady. You know what we call your planet, Krell? Vaxoria Prime. We call it a paradise world. Perfect gravity, perfect atmosphere, perfect temperature regulation. Your hospitals are clean and organized and properly staffed. You have medical drones that do half the work for you. You train in ideal conditions. And that is bad? I asked, genuinely confused. No, not bad. Lucky. You are incredibly lucky. But it means when things go wrong, when conditions stop being ideal, you do not have the experience to handle it. He gestured around the simulation bay. This right here, this is a quiet Tuesday night in a level 1 trauma center in Detroit, or Mumbai, or São Paulo. This is baseline for us. My two hearts, both barely functioning at this point, seemed to stop entirely. This is baseline, I echoed. Yeah. But you said you lose doctors, that the training breaks people. It does, Tom agreed. About 30% of us burn out within 5 years. Another 20% develop substance abuse problems or depression. Earth medical training is not good, Krell. It is brutal and damaging and desperately needs reform. But it does produce doctors who can function in absolutely terrible conditions. Because we are from a death world, and terrible conditions are kind of our specialty. I sat there, processing this information, my exhausted brain struggling to reshape my entire understanding of the universe. We were the elite, I had thought. We were the best, I had believed. But elite compared to what? Best under what conditions? A shadow fell over us, and I looked up to see Instructor Vaughn standing there, all 6 eyes focused on our conversation. I tried to stand, failed, and gave up. If he wanted to discipline me for sitting during the simulation, he would just have to do it while I was on the floor. Blake is correct, Vaughn said, his voice carrying across the bay. The few remaining students still working turned to listen. About all of it, I designed this simulation specifically to be equivalent to standard Earth medical training conditions. Do you know why? No one answered. We were too tired and too humbled. Because this class, this entire cohort, has been the most arrogant group of students I have ever taught. You arrived here believing you were superior, believing your species, your training, your biology made you better than everyone else. You looked down on others. You mocked a human student for having the audacity to study alongside you. I felt shame burn through my exhaustion. He was talking about me. About all of us. So I decided to show you the truth, Vaughn continued. The truth is that the species you mock, the planet you call primitive, produces medical professionals who operate at a level most of you cannot even comprehend. Not because they are better, not because they are superior, but because they have no choice, because their world is harsh and unforgiving, and they adapt or they die. He looked at Tom, something like respect in all 6 eyes. Earth's medical training is brutal, it is cruel, it damages good people, and breaks brilliant minds. It should not be necessary. But it exists because Earth is a death world, and death worlds do not produce soft survivors. Tom shifted uncomfortably beside me. Instructor, I appreciate the sentiment, but I am not trying to make anyone feel bad. I am just doing what I was trained to do. I know, Vaughn said. And that, Blake, is exactly the point. He walked away, leaving us sitting there in the wreckage of our assumptions. Around the bay, the remaining students were looking at each other, at Tom, at themselves. Seeing perhaps for the first time what I was seeing. We were not superior. We had just never been properly tested. We had confused privilege for excellence, ideal conditions for skill, comfort for competence. And it had taken a human from a primitive death world with barbaric training methods and terrible coffee to teach us that lesson. I am sorry, I said quietly, for how I treated you when you arrived, for assuming you did not belong here. Tom looked at me, surprised. Then he smiled. small and genuine. Apology accepted, Krell. And for what it is worth, you have done better than you think. You are still here, still trying. That counts for something. I am sitting on the floor, I pointed out. Yeah, but you are sitting on the floor at hour 52. That is respectable. Somehow, coming from him, it actually felt like praise. We sat there together, a Vaxorian who had learned humility the hard way, and a human who had never needed to learn it at all, waiting for the final 20 hours to pass. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than exhaustion and shame. I felt respect. Hour 72 arrived with dawn, and I had never been so grateful to see artificial lighting shift from emergency blue back to standard white. The change seemed symbolic somehow, like the universe itself was acknowledging that our trial by fire had finally mercifully ended. I was still alive. Technically, my body would probably disagree with that assessment for the next several days, but my hearts were beating, my lungs were functioning, and my brain was producing something that vaguely resembled coherent thought. I considered all of that a victory. The final alarm sounded, a gentle chime that seemed absurdly peaceful after 72 hours of chaos. Instructor Vaughn's voice came over the intercom, and I swear I heard satisfaction in his tone. Simulation complete. All remaining students report to debriefing hall in 30 minutes. Medical staff is available for anyone requiring assistance. I looked around the bay, taking inventory of who had survived. The word survived felt appropriate, despite this being a simulation. Out of 37 students who had started, only 8 of us were still standing. Well, 7 standing and me sitting. I was working on standing. It was a process. Tom Blake was at Station 4. Methodically cleaning his work area with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout the entire nightmare. His uniform was wrinkled now, finally, and I could see dark circles under his eyes. So he was human after all, capable of showing fatigue. That was almost comforting. Beside him were 2 other humans I had barely noticed during the chaos. One was a woman named Lisa Park, short and stocky with black hair pulled back in a practical knot. The other was a tall man called David Okonkwo, whose dark skin glistened with sweat but whose hands were still steady. Both of them looked tired but functional. Moving through their post-procedure protocols like this was just another shift. 3 humans. 3 humans had completed the full 72 hours still capable of performing medicine. The rest of us, we were disasters. Goran had been removed at hour 61 after he started hallucinating and tried to perform surgery on a supply cabinet. Thessa was in medical observation for severe exhaustion. Of the non-human students still present, most of us were held together by spite, stimulants, and the absolute refusal to quit after coming this far. I finally managed to stand, using the wall for support. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone who had made terrible life choices. I stumbled toward the exit. My pride no longer even a memory, just a distant concept I had heard about once. Tom appeared beside me, not touching but close enough to catch me if I fell. Need help getting to debriefing? He asked. I need help getting everywhere, I admitted, but I will manage. Probably. Maybe. He walked with me anyway, adjusting his pace to match my pathetic shuffle. Lisa and David joined us, forming a strange little group in the corridor. Behind us I heard other students emerging from the simulation bay, their movements slow and pained. That was intense, Lisa said, her accent doing something interesting to the translator. Reminded me of my second-year residency at County General, except cleaner. And with fewer gunshot wounds, David added. I miss gunshot wounds. They are straightforward. They were joking. After 72 hours of medical hell, they were joking about it. I wanted to be offended by their casual attitude, but I was too tired and too impressed. This was their normal. This was what they trained for, prepared for, expected from their careers. We reached the debriefing hall, a large amphitheater with comfortable seating that I appreciated more than I had ever appreciated furniture before. I collapsed into a chair. Other students filtered in, each looking like they had personally fought a small war and lost. Instructor Vaughn stood at the podium, waiting until all 8 of us were seated. His 6 eyes scanned the group, lingering on each student. You survived, he said simply. Not all of you completed the full rotation. Not all of you maintained acceptable performance standards throughout, but you survived, and that itself is noteworthy. He pulled up a holographic display showing statistics, pass rates, error frequencies, response times. The data was not flattering for most of us. My own performance metrics showed a sharp decline after hour 30, a brief recovery around hour 45, and then a steady deterioration into barely acceptable competence. Then Vaughn showed the human scores. Tom, Lisa, and David had maintained consistent performance throughout all 72 hours. Not perfect, but steady. Their error rates were minimal. Their response times actually improved as the simulation progressed, as if they had needed time to warm up. 3 students completed this simulation at the level I expect from certified emergency medicine specialists, Vaughn said. All 3 are human. All 3 trained on Earth. All 3 experienced conditions during their education that make our simulation look comfortable by comparison. He paused, letting that sink in. This was not an accident. This was not genetic superiority or biological advantage. This was training. Harsh, brutal, arguably unethical training, but effective nonetheless. Earth produces medical professionals who function in conditions that break everyone else because those conditions are normal for them. I sat there, staring at the statistics, feeling the last remnants of my arrogance crumble into dust. I had been so certain of my superiority, so convinced that my species, my training, my pedigree made me better than a human from a primitive death world. And I had been wrong, spectacularly, humiliatingly wrong. Vaughn dismissed us, and we filed out slowly, painfully. I noticed something as we entered the main corridor. Students were waiting, not the 37 who had started the simulation, but others. Students from different classes, different specialties. Word had spread, apparently, about what had happened, about who had succeeded. And they were not waiting for me or Thessa or any of the supposedly elite students. They were waiting for Tom, for Lisa, for David. Waiting to talk to them, to ask questions, to request study partnerships. I watched as a Thelen student approached Tom nervously, asking if he would be willing to share training techniques. A Korathi asked Lisa about stress management. A group of 4 surrounded David, peppering him with questions about Earth medical protocols. The humans looked uncomfortable with the attention but answered graciously, patiently, treating each question seriously. They did not gloat. They did not mock. They just helped, because apparently that was what they did. I stood there watching this scene and felt something shift inside me. Respect, yes. Humility, certainly, but also curiosity. Genuine curiosity about Earth, about human medicine, about the training that produced professionals like this. Tom noticed me watching and walked over, leaving the crowd behind. "You okay, Krell?" he asked. "I will be," I said. Eventually, after I sleep for approximately 100 hours, I hesitated, then asked the question burning in my mind. "Tom, would you be willing to study with me, to share knowledge? I realize I have no right to ask, given how I treated you initially, but I want to learn. I want to understand how you do what you do." He smiled. That small, genuine smile I was beginning to recognize. "Of course. I would be happy to. And Krell, about how you treated me. We are past that. We went through the trial together. That means something." "It does," I agreed, feeling relief wash over me. Around us, the clinic continued to fill with students seeking human study partners, seeking knowledge from the species we had mocked and dismissed. The dawn light streaming through the station windows seemed brighter somehow, illuminating a future I had not expected. I had come to Meridian Crossing believing I was elite, superior, destined for greatness based on my species and pedigree. I was leaving that belief behind, replacing it with something better. Humility, respect, understanding that excellence was not about where you came from or what advantages you had been born with. It was about what you did when conditions were terrible and everything was falling apart and you were the only thing standing between life and death. It was about what humans called just another Tuesday. And I wanted to learn everything they could teach me. The primitive Earthborn, I had called them. The species that needed humbling, I had thought, but the only one who needed humbling had been me, and they had taught me that lesson with grace, competence, and burnt vegetation drinks I still did not understand. I would never underestimate a human again. More importantly, I would never underestimate anyone again based on assumptions and arrogance. Dawn had broken over Meridian Crossing, and with it my perspective had finally, painfully grown.